So Hugh, when you were a teenager in England and this story about Jeremy Thorpe trying to conspire to murder his lover was, unfolding on television news, did you ever think to yourself, let's make a pretty interesting movie?
No, but I was enjoying it. The whole nation was loving it. It was fabulous comedy drama unfolding in front of us, and it had this brilliant sort of Monty Python aspect to it because it was really about the absurdity of the British establishment. In many ways, it was the last hurrah of the British establishment, where men, almost exclusively men, from a certain background, ran the country, and if they got into trouble, they sort of backed each other up and hushed up their scandals and things like that.
Well, I mean, the show does take on this darkly comedic tone that is befitting of that absurdity. Was that something that was difficult to capture correctly? Because it's not quite farcical, but it's also, there's some funny bits in there.
Yeah, well, it was very much the intention because the book by John Preston took that tone, absolutely accurate, but with an eye for the absurd elements of it, and then Russell Davies, who's a brilliant screenwriter, preserved that in the script, and then we did, yes, manage to, I think, preserve it again in the actual acting and production. But it is delicate. I remember the music being particularly delicate. There was a lot of debate about, is this too jaunty and funny, this music? But I think in the end it's brilliant.
Tell us a little bit about who Jeremy Thorpe was and what your, interpretation of the character as it is was.
Well, Jeremy Thorpe was a British politician, leader of one of the three big parties in Britain, and a bit of a star. He was considered flamboyant, witty, unusual, and kind of revived this third party, which had always languished behind the other two. And he seemed to be a member of the establishment. He'd been to the best school in Britain, Eton. He'd been very expensive. He'd been to Oxford. He seemed to have it all, and yet, because of the social mores, restrictions of the day, he couldn't admit that his true sexuality was that he was gay. And he had all these lovers, and one in particular stalked him for decades. And it seems that in the end, this chap, Jeremy Thorpe, decided to try and kill his ex-lover. It was the only way to preserve his career and his family, and because he got married and he had a kid. And so he took out this bungling, hopeless, upper-class English version of a hit on his ex-gay lover. So that's the true story. And yes, what was my interpretation of him? Well, you come from both ends. There was the exterior, there he is on YouTube. Still, there's lots of footage. That's very helpful, interesting to see the way he moved and spoke and did his hair and all that. But then in terms of his inner life, for me, it was about pain, really. It was about the pain of two things: being unable to express his sexuality openly, ever. Even when the story finishes after 2 decades in a massive trial, he still can't admit to his lawyer that he's ever been gay, even though it's patently clear that he was. And also, I think the pain of being a narcissist, because he certainly was that too, like so many politicians.
That scene with the lawyer, it actually really stuck out to me because it was that in that moment he's also he's asking him, why Norman? Why do you seem to love this guy so much? And he starts reflecting on, some of the past experiences he's had with other men that have not gone very well, and it really drives home the fact that this is a man in a time when it was very dangerous. It's still very dangerous in a lot of respects.
Yeah. He was Well, who knows whether it was choice or just the restrictions of his time and his class. But his sex life was largely furtive fumbles and one-offs in pubs and public lavatories and things. And that's what he talks about in that big scene with his lawyer. Or it's the nearest he ever gets to talking about having been gay and how dangerous and unsatisfactory that kind of sex life is.
Right. You mentioned the fact that he's a politician, and we were talking about this off camera, just like the use of contact lenses and how that made him appear more shark-like. And I mean, a lot of his decisions are about sort of self-preservation, whether it's getting married to a woman who he doesn't really love, but it's all because of appearances, and the whole plot to kill Norman. Can you talk a bit about his sort of political machinations?
Well, he was a pure political animal. I mean, to use the shark metaphor again, he was like a great white. The great white, they say, is this perfect killing machine, and he was a perfect political machine. Every single thing he did in life was geared to political advancement of his personal career and his party. And I've met, having done a lot of politics in the last 5 years in Britain, I've come up close with a lot of politicians. And the higher they rise, the more shark-like they are. It's terrifying. There is no... You look at these people and you think, well, where's the humanity? And you realize it's gone. It's gone. They're machines now. They're just, how do I further my career or my party? Every single calculation, every moment of the day. And I think Thorpe was very like that.
So like how it is out here, people sort of just leave behind whatever morals they brought with them to the Capitol. And
yeah, well, I think they may bring morals. I think Thorpe brought morals as an idealistic young man, and they gradually get worn off in the sort of board game of politics, whether it's Westminster or Washington, and the deals you have to cut and the compromises you have to make, and you end up with these perfectly polished pebbles who are no longer human at all.
I was really amused by the ways in which you and the writer and the director Stephen Frears sort of like poke holes into the stuffiness of this kind of upper class mentality of Britain, and the way that Norman's life and his experiences contrast with that. Can you talk a bit about that?
Well, yes. You see, Stephen Frears, he's very attracted to, I would almost say, the grotesque. It's, or at least the weird shapes that human beings ended up being twisted into. If you think about some of his best films, what's the Joe Wharton one called? About the playwright.
Prick Up Your Ears. Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of tone, I think, is Stephen at his absolute best, and it's prodding away at privilege and entitlement. Yeah, and in contrast to that in this film, because that's the sort of story of Thorpe, you have the story of his lover, Norman Scott, who was brave enough to be openly gay in a time when it was very rare to do that. And his tragic life, because he was a sort of disaster area. He never got it together, never really found a job or settled down, knew who he was particularly. And to this day, he's still alive, Norman.
Yeah.
And he's very charming. A lot of the filmmakers went to see him before we started shooting and came back saying how charming he is. And I believe that he is, but I think he's still got issues.
To say the least, yeah.
Yeah, he still wants his national insurance card, which he was bullying Thorpe for in 1965.
My friends who I was watching it with at the time, they found that to be a pretty amusing cap at the end when it says that. So he's still waiting on this.
But it's true.
Yeah.
It's true.
40 years later, yeah.
Yeah.
Stephen Frears, you've worked with him before on Florence Foster Jenkins. What kind of a director is he working with actors?
Well, Frears is not at all what I expected when he asked me to be in Florence Foster Jenkins, I had assumed that he was very art, cinema, intense, that there'd be deep, complicated discussions about character and motivation and all those things, which I'm not, that's not my world, it's not how I work normally. And so I was dreading that. But I thought, well, when in Rome. So I prepared 20 very intelligent questions about the script and the character. I went to meet him for a cup of tea somewhere. And every single question I asked him, he said, I don't know, no idea. Don't ask me, I'm just the director, don't ask me. And I thought, is this a joke? Is this a pose? And now that I know him well over 2 films, it's partly a joke, but it's partly what I've noticed other very good directors do is they're not interested in talk, they're not interested really in the words, they watch the monitor especially, and they're saying, come on, they're like blank slates, entertain me, or move the story forward, and so it's much more instinctive. But it's a little unnerving for actors who do want a lot of chat, because you get zero. I mean, you may have interviewed him, and you get nothing. He teaches at London Film School once a month, and I often ask him, what do you say? Because whenever he's been asked a question at a Q&A with me, he's always said, no idea.
He's always been one of my favorites too, because like the range of films that he makes, it's like this is different from Dangerous Liaisons, which is different from The Grifters, but there's...
I think his greatest strength is his taste in material. Yeah. Great taste. He very rarely picks a dud.
And he's very good also at like making material entertaining.
Yes.
I mean, this is a lot of fun to watch, while at the same time having, there's a bit of a message in here about LGBTQ rights and about the class system, but it's most of all a lot of fun to watch.
Well, that's right. He's an entertainer. Yeah. And the older I get, the more I realise the people I admire most in my business are at heart, they're entertainers, or at least they never forget they're that and never despise it and never disappear up their own arse trying to be arty.
Right. Working with Ben Whishaw, I don't think you two have a ton of scenes together. You're apart most of the time, but you two do have some really crucial moments together, especially in the first episode. Can you talk a bit about what that dynamic was like?
Well, it was my third outing with Ben, because he was actually my wife in Cloud Atlas.
Right, yeah.
Only a man like you would have known that. When I play a horrible, grumpy old man, he's my wife lying in bed next to me. Then, of course, he's Paddington in Paddington 2, when I try and kill him. And then I try and kill him again in A Very English Scandal.
He needs to stay away from you, is what he...
Yeah. When as I've said in interviews before, I've been trying to either rape or kill Ben for 4 years now. So in this film, we actually shot our love affair in a day, because they're all done in little vignettes, and it is an odd experience to be there at 8 in the morning with Ben, who I know a bit but not that well, and they say action, and you just got to put your tongue down his throat. There it is, and do sex. So we did a lot of kissing on the bed, and I thought, no one had shouted cut.
No.
So I thought, I don't know what to do now. Oh, well, maybe I'll have a go at his nipples. So I did that.
Yeah.
But it's tricky.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's really, it's amazing to think that was all done in a day.
That little sequence of the sort of 2-year romance we did in a day.
That's incredible. I want to talk a bit about the awards recognition this show has received so far. Golden Globe nominations, SAG, BAFTA TV, Critics' Choice. You've been nominated at all 4. What does that mean for you in terms of this role in this show?
It's really nice, and to say anything else would be absurd. It's just really gratifying. These things are not easy, and you sweat bullets over them, at least I do. I prepared for Thorpe for about a year. I think it got delayed, and so it was just more and more prep and more worry. And you know, Stephen Frears would tell you I drive everyone mad with my anxieties. And so to come out the other end and people to love it and be nice about it almost makes it worthwhile.
Well, you've won a Golden Globe before, back in the beginning of your career out here for Four Weddings and a Funeral. Can you talk a little bit about that and what that was like?
Well, of course, in those days, I was suddenly propelled from almost total obscurity to the opposite with this one film, Four Weddings, and I didn't really understand anything, especially on the American side of it all. So when they said, "Oh, well, you've been nominated for a Golden Globe," I didn't know if that was good, bad, indifferent. Really, it sounded pretty good, and showed up and then won it. That was very nice. But you know, again, I had no knowledge of it all. I remember coming off the stage in one of the bigwigs from Gramercy who were distributing it, saying, "Well, that's a lock on an Oscar nomination." And I thought, what? And it wasn't anyway. He was completely wrong. Although the film got nominated, I think, and maybe Richard did.
He did, yeah. That was
yeah. So that was nice. But really, from then till now, no, that's not true. There's been a few other Golden Globe nominations in between. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there were. But you know, we do slightly live in a world where you're either making films that people go and see, or you're making films that get awards.
Right.
That's an unhappy division, I think.
Right. Well, before I let you go, I do want to ask, you know, between this and Paddington 2, Florence Foster Jenkins, Cloud Atlas, you mentioned, and a few other things, I mean, you've really been doing a lot of really interesting character work. Do you feel like you've hit a creative stride in your career where you're, you know, the parts, you know, are getting better, you're getting better at playing them? I mean, it really does feel like there's something sparking here in the last few years.
Well, it's nice of you to say that. Some of it, I think, is just that as I've said before in interviews, I got old and ugly, and they can't put me in romantic comedies anymore. And I'm grateful to those films. I'm proud of them. It's nice that people watch them all the time. A lot of them I can look squarely in the face. Not all, most. But there's no question, since that stopped, the parts have, you know, stretched me, as they say, and I've enjoyed that. And you know, sometimes I think, well, did I get better? And I have. I've certainly got better because of having children, which is interesting. Suddenly, what was left of my desiccated English heart sort of opened up again, and that's a very, very useful tool to have as an actor, to be able to feel things. And but I think it was parts that might have been slightly holding me back before, because if I think about a boy or a very peculiar practice, no, it wasn't called that. What the fuck was it called? The film I did with Mike Newell just after Four Weddings. An Awfully Big Adventure.
Yeah.
Where I'm this evil theatre director. You know, when I had character parts, I liked them and was quite good. It's leading man. It's difficult.
Yeah. Well, you're sort of in that stage of your career that people like Paul Newman or Jack Lemmon were, where, you know, they started doing their best work.
Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, you look at The Verdict and things like that.
Yeah.
Glenn Ross, and you know, it's like something happens when you've got a lot of experience, and
experience certainly helps a lot.
Yeah.
A lot. Filmmaking, you know, film acting. Because I sometimes watch, I'm making something at the moment, and you watch really good actors come in who haven't done much film work before, and young ones, you know, and you just think, this is so hard for you without knowing all these tricks.
Yeah.
It's taken decades or tricks and little emergency procedures when it's going wrong to bring yourself back.
Yeah. Well, it's a wonderful show.
Thank you very much.
Great performance. Thank you so much for your time.
All right, thanks.